This video is inspired by real events. Certain scenes and details have been altered or dramatized for storytelling purposes. We were only supposed to stay a couple of weeks, just a short trip, a simple family visit. That's what he told me. It was his country, not mine. But I agreed anyway, for our daughter's sake, for our marriage. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that things were improving between us. But they weren't. Back in Michigan, I had already found out he was seeing someone else. He promised it was finished. He pleaded for forgiveness. He said this trip would help us heal. He swore it would be safe. But 3 days after we landed in Tehran, everything shifted. He took my passport, and my daughter's as well. When I asked why, he smiled calmly and said it was just for security. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said we weren't leaving, that this was our home now. At first, I laughed. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. I was trapped, stranded in a country I didn't know, with no rights, no friends, no escape plan. My daughter was only 4. That was when the fear took hold, not for myself, but for her. I wasn't just a wife betrayed anymore. I was a captive. I woke up the next morning hoping it had all been a terrible dream. But the passport was still missing. My daughter lay beside me fast asleep. And I was still there. The house felt like a prison masked as a warm home. Smiles, polite tea ceremonies, endless chatter I couldn't follow. But beneath it all was control. I wasn't a guest. I was property. I begged him to let us leave. He laughed in my face. This was home now. Then his demeanor changed. His voice turned sharp. His fists clenched. The man I'd once loved seemed to vanish, replaced by someone cold, someone who wanted to dominate me. He told me if I tried to flee, I'd be beaten. That if I ran, he would keep our daughter. That here, in Iran, I had no legal rights. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not even as a person. He wasn't lying. Everywhere I went, someone watched me. I had to cover my hair, lower my eyes, speak in hushed tones. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the rules. I didn't belong there. But I pretended, for her. Every day, I forced a smile for my little girl. Played games with her. Taught her English words so she wouldn't forget. Every night, I cried silently beside her, wondering if she'd ever see home again. I tried to contact the embassy. No way. I tried to call home. Blocked. I asked for help, but no one listened. To them, I was just another wife. To him, I was now a possession. He started reading religious texts out loud every day. Tried to convert me. Watched my every move. I wasn't allowed out alone. I couldn't speak freely. I wasn't allowed to have dreams. Sometimes I stared out the window and wondered if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. But I couldn't leave her behind. My daughter was the only reason I kept breathing, the only spark of light in that endless darkness. So I started to plan. Not just how to run, but how to survive long enough to do it. I became what he wanted to see. Quiet, compliant, invisible. But inside, I was awake, counting the days. There are prisons made of walls and bars, and there are prisons built from fear. Mine was both. Days turned into weeks, maybe months. I stopped keeping track. Each morning I played my part. obedient wife, doting mother, a shadow of who I used to be. But I was watching, listening, noting everything. How long the neighbors stayed outside, which relative seemed kinder, who looked away when I spoke English to my daughter. Every small detail was ammunition for the day I'd need it. My first attempt was cautious. I asked a kind, soft-spoken woman in the family if I could send a simple letter to my mother, just to let her know we were okay. She smiled, nodded, and told him everything. That night he erupted. He screamed so hard the walls rattled. He raised his hand but didn't strike, only because our daughter was watching. He locked me in a room for 2 days. No food, no light, just my daughter crying on the other side. When he finally opened the door, he didn't say anything, just stared at me like I'd betrayed him. But I learnt then that I couldn't trust anyone. Not the relatives, not the neighbors, not even the other women. Fear was in every look, every word, every locked door. So I waited. And I learned. I picked up words in secret. Every phrase I understood became a new weapon. I memorized street names, bus routes, addresses. I listened carefully to news on the radio. I learned where embassies were, emergency numbers, routes out of the city. Sometimes I thought about running into traffic and screaming for help. But who would listen to a foreign woman calling her husband an abuser? In their eyes, I was the one betraying him. And if I were arrested, he'd keep our daughter. That was always the threat. He didn't have to hurt me physically. All he had to do was remind me he had her. So I kept silent and waited for the smallest chance. Eventually, I heard whispers, through family gossip, from a cousin of a neighbor. Someone who knew a way out. A smuggler, a fixer. No names, no promises. Just a thread of hope wrapped in enormous danger. I listened carefully at a family gathering. I couldn't sleep that night. Could I really risk everything on a stranger? My daughter's life on a rumor? The next morning, I told him I wanted to go to the market. He let me, but only with a female relative. Still, it was the first time I'd been outside in weeks. I watched every alley, every face. Then I saw her, a Western woman, moving confidently through the crowd in a headscarf. I stared too long. She noticed. And in that brief glance, she understood. That night, a note was slipped under my door. Just 2 words. Don't give up. My heart pounded. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Someone was willing to help. Weeks slipped by after that note. Then, one day, I was quietly brought to a cramped apartment in a part of Tehran I'd never seen. The air smelled of fuel and stale bread. Inside sat a man in a long coat who kept his face in shadow. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "If you want out, there's a way, but it will cost you everything." I asked what he meant. He looked at my daughter and then back at me. "You might die. She might die. Or you both might disappear forever. Are you ready for that?" I wasn't ready. But I nodded. Because I knew what staying would do to her. I'd seen it already. Her voice getting quieter. Her eyes losing their spark. Her smile fading into something empty. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about saving her before she forgot what freedom felt like. Before she forgot who she was. He told me to wait. That he'd be in touch when it was safe. He gave me no name, no number, just silence. I walked home as if nothing had happened, made dinner, sang to my daughter off key, smiled at the man who held me prisoner. But inside, I was already gone. The message came late at night. A brief ring on the phone. Silence. That was the sign. I didn't sleep after that. I lay next to my daughter, memorizing the curve of her cheek in the moonlight, wondering if it would be the last night I'd see her alive. There was no backup plan. If this failed, he would never forgive me. He would take her forever. The next morning, I told him I wanted to visit a shrine with his sister. A show of faith, a performance of obedience. He fell for it. He even smiled, convinced he'd won. We finally had the papers, the approvals, the embassy's promise of protection. But even then, I didn't let myself believe it. Not until I saw the airport with my own eyes. Not until I felt the tickets in my shaking hands. Not until we stood in line, waiting to board the flight that might finally take us home. That word, home, felt so fragile because I knew at any second it could vanish. He had connections, influence. All it would take was one phone call, one border guard willing to stop us. My daughter clung to me, exhausted and silent. She didn't ask questions anymore. She just watched my face, as if she knew everything depended on whether or not I smiled. So I smiled for her, even as my stomach twisted itself into knots. We reached the final checkpoint. A border officer with a stern expression took our passports, looked at them, looked at us, looked again. The silence stretched on forever. I imagined alarms blaring, soldiers rushing in, being torn away from her. But he just stamped them, handed them back without a word. We walked forward, and that was it. No alarms, no shouts, just the echo of our footsteps in the boarding tunnel. I found our seats, buckled us in, held her so tightly against me that I felt her tiny heartbeat next to mine. The engines roared, the plane lifted. Iran fell away beneath the clouds, and I cried, not because we were free yet, but because for the first time in so long we were moving in the right direction, toward air I could actually breathe, toward nights without locked doors, toward a place where my daughter might remember how to laugh again. When we landed in America, reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved in my face. Everyone wanted our story, but I had nothing to say, because the story wasn't over. We were safe, but we were broken. She was quiet, confused. He had stolen so much from us. Time, rust, peace. We were home, but we weren't whole. Freedom isn't a finish line. It isn't the moment the plane lands, or the embassy door shuts behind you. Freedom is a process, and for us, it was a painful one. We were back in America, the place I used to call home, but I didn't recognize it anymore. I didn't even recognize myself. The woman I used to be was gone. What remained was someone harder, quieter, always glancing over her shoulder. My daughter was safe, but she was changed. She didn't speak the same way, didn't smile the same. At night, she'd wake up crying. In the mornings, she'd ask when we were going back. She missed her toys, her cousins, even her father. She didn't understand. How could she? She was just a child, trapped in a battle between cultures, between control and freedom, between love and survival. I tried to give her stability, a new school, therapy, a bright, cheerful bedroom filled with light. But the shadows were still there. As for me, I talked. I wrote. I shouted the truth until someone listened. I shared our story with anyone who would hear it, not for fame, not for revenge, but so that no one else would ever have to go through what we did. I sat in courtrooms, faced politicians, looked skeptics in the eye when they asked, "Why didn't you just leave sooner?" And I told them the truth. Because I couldn't. Because when the person you love becomes your prison, you forget where the door is. He never faced consequences. He stayed in Iran, untouched. A respected doctor. A father who insisted I'd stolen his child. And maybe, to some people, I did. But I didn't steal her away. I brought her back. Back to freedom. Back to the chance to heal. Back to a life where no man would ever own her. Years have passed. She's older now. Strong, smart, unapologetic. And me, I'm still healing, still remembering, still walking through the fire. I survived. Because some stories don't end, they echo. He let me go. But I didn't go to the shrine. Instead, I met the man in the crowded bazaar. He handed me a small bag. Inside were forged documents, spare clothes, a bottle of water, bogot, and hurried instructions I could barely follow. "Midnight," he whispered. "A driver will come. Don't be late." Then he was gone. I went home and pretended everything was normal. Cooked, cleaned, even laughed at his stupid jokes, though my hands were trembling the entire time. When midnight came, it felt like a curse. I wrapped my daughter in a shawl, told her it was a game where we had to be very, very quiet. She nodded sleepily, trusting me the way only children can. I held her close, stepped out into the darkness. A car waited, old, dented, the engine rumbling low. The driver didn't say a word, just gestured for us to get in. We drove in silence. Every checkpoint felt like it would be the end. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. If they stopped us, if they checked the papers, if they realized who we were. But we kept going. And when the sun finally rose, we were at the outskirts of Tehran. The driver finally spoke. "You walk now." I looked out the window. Dirt roads snaked into distant mountains. The border wasn't close. It was all on foot from here. I lifted my daughter into my arms. She was limp with exhaustion. My feet blistered with every step. My mouth was dry. My heart felt like it would burst from my chest. Then we heard it. Engines. Voices. Orders being barked in Farsi. Soldiers. The driver had warned me, "If they find you, say you're visiting family. Lie. Do whatever you have to. Don't let them take the child." I held her tighter. We ducked behind jagged rocks, covered ourselves in dust and silence. She started to cry. I pressed my lips to her ear, begging her, "Please, please, just a little longer." The voices drew closer. Then, mercifully, they moved on. We stayed frozen in place until the world fell quiet again. And then we kept moving. Hour after hour, my legs burned. My arms ached. My eyes stung from sweat and fear. Finally, in the grey dawn light, we saw him. The smuggler waiting on the other side. A small man with a thick beard and outstretched hand. I had nothing left to give him but my tears. We had crossed a point of no return. I didn't know what country we were in. I didn't care. We weren't free yet, but we were out. He led us through back roads and narrow alleys, avoiding checkpoints. We changed cars again and again, spent nights in abandoned houses, eating scraps of bread and old fruit in complete silence. I didn't ask where we were. I didn't want to know. All I cared about was getting to the next step. We needed the US Embassy, but embassies aren't safe houses. They're labyrinths of paperwork, bureaucracy, and political caution. Especially for a woman like me, an American who had willingly entered Iran and stayed. That's what their government claimed. They didn't mention the stolen passports or the months of captivity. To them, I was a mother abducting her child, a wife turning against her husband, and for many officials, that was all they needed to hear. The embassy gave us a small room, papers to fill out, endless questions. Each form felt like a test I might fail. Each signature felt like a possible trap. All the while, I waited for the worst. The knock on the door that would take my daughter away. He had already filed paperwork with Iranian courts, accusing me of kidnapping her, demanding she be returned immediately. And under Iranian law, he had a case. There, the child belongs to the father. Always. I sat in that embassy for days, sleepless and shaken, pleading with anyone who would listen. Please, don't send us back. I wrote letters, called journalists, tried to remind anyone back in America that I still existed. And then, one morning, a call came from the US State Department. Their message was clear. You can come home, but your daughter's legal status is complicated. He may still try to stop it. My blood went cold. What did that mean? Would they separate us at the airport? Would I be forced onto a plane while she was dragged away, crying? I looked at my little girl asleep on a thin embassy cot, hugging a second-hand teddy bear. She didn't understand any of it, but I did. This was our final fight. I met with embassy lawyers and told them everything. Every threat, every bruise, every night locked behind a door. I didn't cry, I couldn't afford to, because this time there could be no mistake. If we left, we had to leave together.